Any and all expressed, shared, or implied suggestions, opinions, actions, jokes, discussions, or points of view shared on the Indigenous 21 podcast are our own, hosts and guests alike, and strictly for entertainment purposes only. They do not represent opinions or beliefs on any background groups we might identify with, such as family, village, clan, tribe, gender, age, ethnicity, race, religion, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, education, or career professions. Content shared on the Indigenous 21 podcast can and may be emotional or thought-provoking, and as such, may contain controversial subject matter. While it is not our intent to create environments that will cause harm to our audience, we advise that you feel free to stop listening at any time, as these controversial subjects will continue for any given length of time. We believe in making the Indigenous 21 podcast to be a safe space for open, honest dialogue and/or discussions about any given subject as they arise from our hosts, guests, and audience commentary. Discussions, information, opinions, or suggestions shared on the Indigenous 21 podcast should not be acted, attempted, or relied upon as professional guidance or advice. Welcome to the Indigenous 21 podcast, where we discuss modern Native narratives in the 21st century. I am your host, Dee Dee, and we have a special guest with us here today. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Summer Aguilera with Honor Collective in Tucson, Arizona.
So basically what we wanted to do here is have a little bit of a girl session, an episode for the ladies. Summer and I, we are related through my dad. We basically both live in the Southern Arizona area, and we've been involved in a lot of social justice groups. Summer has been mainly involved in is
missing and murdered Indigenous women, bringing awareness to not only Indigenous folk who weren't aware of how serious the problem is, but people who claim to be allies really don't have an understanding of what Indigenous women deal with on a daily basis. So pertinent to recognize the struggles that we have.
When you're discussing, I guess, when you're creating these spaces for, mainly for Indigenous women, and we have our support, of course, we want the support. What are some of the boundaries and some of the cultural awarenesses that maybe an ally that who's not Indigenous would need to be aware of when coming into the space?
The best way to explain this is from our own experience that brought Honor Collective together. Feels like a lifetime ago, and it feels like just yesterday. 2019, January 2019, right as I was dealing with the Tucson Women's March, tokenizing Indigenous, Black, LGBTQ, femme folks, we were asked, 6 Indigenous women from Southern Arizona, from different tribes, were asked to help plan 2019 Take Back the Night event, which is it's a national event every year that empowers those who have been victims of sexual violence. Take Back the Night, so we're not scared anymore, is the whole thing behind it. And for this one, they wanted to focus on missing and murdered Indigenous women. And so they did the right thing by asking those of us in the community who are already organizers to come.
Okay.
From the very moment we started, we realized they had no understanding of what they were asking of us. They were asking us to live our own trauma, live the trauma, and explain the trauma to non-Indigenous folk.
Okay.
We accepted the challenge. We called them out and very clearly stated, this is what's going to happen here.
Okay.
And it's going to be hard.
Right.
And as we continued, we realized they still had no idea. They had not done the research. They had not looked into it. So we did a huge workshop that 2 of our very well-respected Indigenous women put together and did. We invited the community to come and learn, and it's a 4-hour class.
Right.
From the beginning of colonization, Columbus landing here, what he did to Indigenous folks, how that is still practiced every single day in current times.
Right.
And the effects it's had over the last, 500 years.
Right.
And these organizers, these white organizers, mostly white women, they were too traumatized after this class to continue to plan with us. And they just left, leaving us this huge event that we had already promised our community.
How were they traumatized? How did it I guess what were their claims of the impacts it made on them?
They claim it re-triggered their own trauma, which I can respect. However, It's not their trauma. It's our trauma.
Okay.
And the two women that did this workshop, the two Native women that did this workshop, one is Tan Atam and the other one is Dene and Santa Clara Pueblo. They were traumatized by sharing that story with so many non-Indigenous people.
Right.
But they never stopped. So my point is we don't get to stop.
Yeah.
Fast forward to next thing we know, it's just Indigenous women doing this huge event that we had promised the community.
Right. So basically, you invited some people to come in, and they were all in for support, claiming that they were all in for support. But when it got to a point to where they realized that it was an environment that they're not used to, then and maybe even, yes, there's some similarity stories involved, but it's like, okay, you're not the center of the story in this particular event, in this particular movement, in this particular space, but we are still counting on you to help us through this endeavor, because of course nobody can do any of these movements, any of these events alone. So we do need to have that support for, from outside people, if possible, if not our own. And it's like, and you guys just let us down. You told us you would be there, and we ran with it. We trusted you in that promise, and you didn't fulfill it.
We didn't only trust them, but they were supposed to be our support system. They were supposed to be our fiscal support, everything, because they've done this before. And we asked for some changes. We asked for it to be on Autumn land, at the co-op farm, all these things. But they all just left. It's another example of performative white allyship.
Okay.
So what came out of it is we were Indigenous women. We all came together, about 32 Indigenous women from Southern Arizona.
Okay.
And we started as a caucus, a women's caucus that turned into Honor Collective. And in 3 weeks, we threw together this amazing, healing, beautiful event with healers and elders and survivors. And hundreds of people came and felt that they were safe, just well taken care of. We strived through it. We got through it. We did an amazing job. But we are still traumatized by that. We had to come up with thousands of dollars to pay the people that this group had promised to pay and stuff. We came up with all that, and we're still dealing with the financial responsibilities from that a year and a half later.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you're still having to pay off.
So my whole point of telling the story is that non-Indigenous folk need to understand that they're coming into our pain, our place, our stories. We are re-triggered by having to teach them this. Do your research. It's all over the web.
Okay. So basically, it's they're wanting to, I'm here for you, but I don't know what we're doing. And it's like, okay, well, now, I mean, we're in an age, a digital age, where information is out there. Just by the click of a button, you type in some words into a search engine, and it's there for you to learn.
The statistics are there. I mean, there's Google MMIW statistics, and 16 well-written articles by Indigenous folk are right there for the research.
Right.
It's laziness. Like I said, performative allyship.
Princess behavior being brought into an Indigenous setting.
How can I help you if I don't know what you need? Well, you want me to teach you about this? Okay, here's what I'm going to tell you is look it up.
Okay, so basically there's no accountability for their own part in it. And it's like, okay, well, hopefully you're mature enough to know how to, how to research, how to conduct research, or how to just look for information. If you truly want to know the information, nothing is going to stop you from searching out the information. Person to person information is one way, but that now in this digital age, it's not the only way of learning. Because I've seen some of that as well. One of the events that, even with BIPOC, when they put on the event, and there were a lot of complaints. I saw a lot of in like the Facebook pages and stuff like that, on the comments about why can't we all of us women share in the same space? Why does it have to be divided? And it's like, well, because there's a different narrative for each group of people. There's a different struggle for each group of people, each different community. So it's like, yes, we have some cross similarities, but your way or your story isn't the only story out there.
There's so many ways you can, the Me Too movement, it was created by a Black woman for her Black daughter who had been victims of sexual violence. And here comes this white woman, Alyssa Milano, and all of a sudden it's a white woman's movement. You don't see the stories of indigenous folks, Black folks, brown folks coming out of this. You just hear white stories.
Right.
That's kind of my point, is like, we have to have that space for ourselves, and we make that space for ourselves because that's the narrative. When you look on TV, we're projected as victims and just victims. They don't project our strength, our traditional strength. I mean, everything that you and I've been through all these years, we still come back together and say, hey, I got you.
Right.
They don't show that part.
Right.
They always show us alone. It's our fault. We put ourselves in those positions. It's rape culture, but it's amplified when it comes to women of color, people of color.
Right.
So we have to create these spaces for ourselves without white folks, because it's how we find our healing. And that's a lot of the work that we do, is healing for Native women, acknowledging your trauma is real, because we don't get to hear that. We don't have time to hear that.
Right.
We are so busy taking care of our homes and our families that a lot of times we don't get to deal with the fact that there's something deep down there that's hurting.
Festering. Okay.
It's hurting all the time.
And that's something that I guess that is a cultural difference between us and I guess our white female allies, is because they have the space, they have the time, they have the affordability of finding spaces for themselves, downtime, me time, or counseling, where they can hire people to come in and take care of their household or whatever. But then again, it all depends on the privilege that each white woman has, and not saying that every white woman has that, but there is a lot more of that on our end. It's like we don't get to stop because today was hard.
Right. Especially for us, those of us that are community leaders for social justice in our communities, specifically focusing on Indigenous women that we work with. Our fight doesn't stop.
Right.
Just because the counts at Standing Rock were closed, their fights never stopped. We're still fighting at the border. Our women were just arrested a week and a half ago at the border, trying to protect burial lands and sacred water.
Yeah.
We're still trying to get our clean water back up on Hopi. Like, that's a fight that I've been part of for 20 years.
Right.
It doesn't stop for us. We don't have that time to rest. You want to be an ally, go to the courts, stop all the land abuse.
Right.
Start bringing awareness to missing and murdered Indigenous people. Because when I go out and talk to non-Indigenous communities, they don't understand the statistics for as of 2016 for women experiencing sexual violence.
Right.
1 in 5 women will suffer from that.
Yeah.
1 in 4 Black women and 1 in 3 Native women will suffer from sexual violence and rape.
Right.
We're 9.8%, I'm sorry, 0.98% of the population, and we have the highest rates of sexual violence towards us, with 85% of those being from non-Indigenous folks.
Right. So even if they say maybe, okay, so if you're looking at just blanket numbers across the board, and you see that maybe there may be more white women that are accounted for reports in that.
Right.
And that's a huge disillusionment too, is that the numbers, yes, okay, so it looks like our numbers are less in our Indigenous communities, our Black communities, any other community of color, it's smaller, but it's like, okay, first of all, how many of those are reported?
Right.
That didn't go unreported,
I mean, honestly, when I was doing my research a few years ago, finding the numbers for Latina women and their sexual and domestic violence that they face are almost non-existent, because they're not reported.
Right.
So then how much of ours are not being reported?
Right. And even if they do go and report it, who's to say that's even being pushed?
Correct.
And held.
So what started a few years ago, there's some amazing, specifically Autumn women that I know that here in Tucson that have been fighting for research. And a committee was created last year, and we're waiting for the president to sign off on it. It's all part of the VAWA Act.
Yeah.
To create investigations for these numbers, to get accurate numbers. Haven't quite got the information yet as of 2020, but it's coming. It's there. and it is worse than what we thought it was.
Right.
Actually, all of our fears have been realized.
Oh my gosh.
So it's a lot to say, it's a lot to think and process, but we don't have that choice.
Yeah. And you don't get that downtime, that breather time.
No. I mean, I'm fortunate. I have a good support system. You all give me that chance to say, hey, you've taken on too much. Have you taken care of yourself?
Right.
Not a lot of women do. But
Right.
that's where, again, Honor Collective comes in, is we're checking on each other every week. Like, hey, have you taken a break today? Have you eaten?
Mhm.
Have you showered? For some of our women, we celebrated one woman showering, one woman coming to a meeting. Her life is so hard. She's going through so much. And this is every day for us. And there's nobody out there supporting her that's non-Native. I mean, my whole point of bringing this up is that, like, people want to say, oh, we support you. We're your allies. We're here for you. Oh, it's too hard for me. I'm going to go for a little bit.
Right.
She doesn't get that choice. So I don't get that choice because she needs someone like me or one of the other women in this group
to step up and actually make sure that she's carrying it out.
So what all this came from this Take Back the Night event came this women's group, this women's circle. And we were fortunate to get a grant through the U of A to do a women's talking circle specifically for Indigenous women who are activists in the community so we can take time to heal.
Yeah.
And during that time, with the pandemic, what was supposed to be 9 months turned into 13 months.
Right.
And it's still going a little bit because everything had to be moved online. But we've faced our trauma. We've talked about vicarious trauma and how the trauma of our ancestors does affect us.
Right.
And trying to change that dialogue from focusing on the trauma from our ancestors being processed through our DNA, but so is our strength. We are still strong people because our ancestors are strong people.
Right. So there's this inherent, when you say trauma, with, like you said, you went back to colonization, forced conversion, forced government schools, our children being snatched up, our ancestors, and having to, put away our culture, put away our languages and our ceremonial practices, basically trying to wipe out our whole identity. What she means when she says historical trauma is that our communities, our indigenous communities, for the most part, have become untrusting. We're no longer trusting of our Anglo allies. And that's lies in the heart of, like, when you give the example of white female allies when they're coming into this space, promising this, promising that, and then them backing out because it's too hard for them. Well, there you go. It's just reaffirming what we've known of you, of your type of people all this time, is that your promise or whatever, it's not worth anything.
It's empty.
It's very empty.
And it's not like, oh, one day I decided, hey, I'm an activist and I'm not going to like white people. That's not what this is.
Right.
This is, I am 39 years old and I have 39 years of struggling, and this point being proven over and over and over again. People say, you're stupid for doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result.
Right.
But honestly, due to what we're taught during childhood, it's a comfort spot and we're actually re-traumatizing ourselves. There's a whole psychological thing behind that, and I could really digress on it. But so I stopped the cycle. Right. I stopped the cycle of trauma. I stopped the cycle of abuse. I'm very careful with my space, and I teach other women of color to be very careful with your space. Take Back the Night wasn't just the event that broke me. It was 3 years trying to work with different women's marches. Yeah. The first one we attended. Right. We attended because one woman made space for Indigenous folks. We went to support her. Right. We went to Phoenix again to support her. Right. And I won't even go into the story of the Phoenix, the 2018 march. Right. It was just hurtful to over 300 Indigenous folk that showed up from that across the state, 33 different tribes. And we were cut off, even though that was supposed to be a focus on missing murdered Indigenous women. Yeah. Tucson, by the time this Tucson march comes up in 2019, they have now tokenized Indigenous folks. They literally checkmarked that they had a Black LGBT woman who was a speaker. That's the march I'm talking about. Oh, yeah. And that's where BIPOC came out of. I remember that. And so all these things come together and come to this point of saying, okay, I'm going to stop standing up and trying to work with you, and I'm going to start standing up for Native women and making sure that we're taken care of and we're successful and that they have a safe place to come home. For us, it's a story about colonization came, we have the Pueblo votes, the priests coming and what they did to our families, the stories from that. For our generation, you've heard the story of Graham going to the boarding schools and how that affected our family.
Right.
When the Mormon church came, how that affected great grandmother and the woman she became because of that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was all passed down to us and to our children. Our story is very different because you grew up on the res, you grew
Right.
up at home. I was here in the city because that's all Graham knew.
Right.
And we've had those discussions. We've had fights about how different we grew up because we didn't understand each other.
Right.
Thankfully, you and I have come so far in our lives, we were able to discuss it and get through and help each other through it. How much other people can't do that?
Right.
How separated are we because of it? I didn't grow up at home. I have great memories of home, but I wish there was more. And
Right.
so you teach me more.
Right.
But the trauma is that there was sexual violence. They're inflicted by white people.
Right.
That's what my grandmother knew, and she didn't trust white people because of that.
Yeah.
And that comes down to us. And my mom, and why my mom struggled being a mom, why grandma had to step up and be my mom so many times is because of these things that come down to where I come from, to who I am as a person. All those things that they went through even through my aunt, that's within me because I experienced their trauma. It's another form of vicarious trauma, but they also continue those cycles. You and I, we got close because we both decided there's these cycles that we see and we're not going to do that to our children.
Right.
We came together to figure out how to stop it.
Right.
So we all have this historical trauma. And it's not just the last 3 generations. Or 4 generations. It's 520 something years worth of trauma that we carry. But Graham survived all of that.
Mm-hmm. It's okay. This is a space to do it.
She was a really good woman.
She was.
As mean as she could be. She loved even more.
Yeah.
She loved me so much.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother passed away last year, so this is hard. This is like the first time I've talked to her about her. So it's not just bad stuff that happened to us.
Right.
She survived that. My mom survived that. My mom and I are so close. And because we decided we're going to stop this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my point is to tell women, and this is the only reason I share this hard stuff, is because other Native women go, we're not that different. Just because I was raised in the city,
right,
I didn't have the privilege to be raised at home the way that we wanted to be. But I also had a lot of trauma that other folks can empathize with and see that I've overcome it.
Right.
They can overcome it.
Right. And I'm pretty sure even though you didn't grow up on the reservation full time, you still visited a lot of those practices, or at least the core values of our ways were still taught to you. Mm-hmm. So even though you didn't get to practice the ceremonials or even, everyday living, what it takes to live out on the reservation full time, you were still passed on that, at least the core of it.
And Graham did everything she could. I mean, that's my memories are you and me giggling a lot. But spending summers with you, with family out there. But that's my whole point comes back to the historical trauma and the historical strength is like MMIW, MMIP is a real issue. Over 5,700 cases active right now, mm-hmm. with less than 250 being actively investigated. Right. It goes into issues of tribal sovereignty. If a non-Native person commits a crime on the Native land, we cannot persecute them. Yeah. So there's laws there that need to be changed. Right. You've got man camps right down here at the border. Right. We have man camps building the wall. Women are going missing. Right. Native women of color are going missing. Mm-hmm. They're trafficked. There's modern slavery. There's so much horrific things that are being done to them because mm-hmm. the entitlement of these folks that think that they can just go take whatever they want. They can build a wall, destroy a town, a village, a tribe, separate the tribe, but also the animals from their ecosystem and destroying the ecosystem. Right. Polluting the water.
And that's a funny thing too, because that you bring up the wall, the borders and everything like that, and how they create these boundaries. And historically speaking, at least not only our own tribe, but also other tribal members that we've spoken to in a lot of these circles, is that none of us, our tribes, have ever believed in borders. They never believed in walls. They never believed in fences. I mean, aside from our own shelters, but even then, on our own family, quote unquote, properties, because back then we didn't have a word for property. It's not something that's ours. It's something that's borrowed and that we're using for as long as we're alive. So we never had fences. We never had property lines, like sidewalk, where that's public property. And then if you cross onto my yard, that's private property. There were no such things. And the reason for that, at least the elders that I spoken to, not only, like I said, not only in our own tribe, but also some of the ladies that I spoken to down here, some of them are medicine women, some of them are healers. And so basically what I gathered, the summarization from all of their teachings and speaking with them, is that the reason why we don't have fences, the reason why we don't put up walls, is because we're not trying to imprison ourselves. When you do that, that's a form of self-imprisonment. So as much as, the Anglo world, how they sell it to be you protecting yourself, it's like, no, you're not really protecting yourself. What happens is that you're shutting yourself off. And so it's like, and so therefore you cut off your potential to grow outward this way.
Right.
And all you're doing is keeping yourself in this way. So sheltered in towards yourself, and without having to even, basically you're sabotaging yourself from reaching your full potential and extending outward. Because we don't have that concept of borders, of fences, of boundaries, of property. That's the reason why we did a lot of trading back then. There was so many, and they think e-commerce is a new thing and it's Anglo driven. It's like we already had all that since time immemorial, where we were already doing trading with one another. We already knew which areas grew, was abundant in whatever kind of crop, animal, any kind of, maybe, I guess what they consider now art, but back then they were considered utility, household functions, like pottery, baskets. Everybody had their own way of doing things, and because there was an abundance of one thing or another, like leather, fur, so it's like there was already all that trade there. And that's the whole reason why we don't believe in borders or walls.
But it's not just from the north. This is where the wall makes absolutely no sense, is because even in Hopi, there are impacts from South American tribes,
right,
that you could there, because those natural migration routes were already there.
Right.
We shared amongst tribes, and our histories are so intersectional.
Right.
Like, why would you put a wall there? Why would you deny people? It's unfathomable to our brains, because of the way we were raised, that this wall needs to be there to keep us separated from people, just because they speak a different language.
Right.
And they were born over there.
They practice a different culture. They practice a different religion.
And it's the borders, the walls, all that. It's because we don't take ownership of the earth.
Right.
She provides everything we need as long as we take care of her. As long as we're taking care of her,
she'll take care. Yeah. As long as we take care of her, she'll take care of us.
And that's creating this wall is destroying the ecosystem. It's hurting her. It's gonna hurt the animals, the plants, and it's gonna hurt us. It's already hurting us.
Right.
And it's, again, unfathomable. I don't understand the thinking of how this makes us safer. There's a whole lot more history in that too, going back to the 1980s, that has the war on drugs and all these things, and how it's actually affected people of color, and this supposed war with Mexico. Mexico is, I mean, if we really want to get technical, we're in Mexico.
Right.
So, I mean,
right.
that's I think probably another conversation.
Right.
That we could
right.
go off
right.
on, but
right. Well, in closing here, we can go ahead and I think it's a lot of great work that you're doing, that you continue to do. I know you stay rooted into the community. And I guess the parts of the community that the populars don't even think about. So it's not a tourist attraction. It's not anything for pageantry. These are real life issues in the community that we're struggling. And it might not affect your own people and your community or whatever you're living in, but guess what? It's still under the same land, which is Juksun.
Mhm.
It's not Tucson. It's Juksun.
Land acknowledgement isn't just to say, oh, let's look at the past. These people took care of this land for us. It's a reminder you are on stolen land, unceded land. This is not to say make it all beautiful and ceremonial. This is to remind all of us this isn't our land.
Right.
And
Right.
that's across the world. Indigenous people's land has been stolen, and it's acknowledgement and holding accountability to whoever's on that land.
Right.
Take care of it, respect it. It's not yours. Big thing that people don't understand why we do land acknowledgement.
Right. Well, thank you so much for being on here. We hope to see you again. And we really just appreciate your time and all the work that you're doing into the community. And if you want to join in on the discussion, please go ahead and go to the anchor.fm podcast platform. You can send in voice recordings of your responses to anything that we've discussed here in the podcast. Or if you are watching us on the YouTube platform, you can leave your likes, comments, subscribes, and you can also find us on our other social media platforms, which is Instagram and as well as Facebook. Just look for Indigenous 21 Media. And we look forward in engaging with you. And until next time, thank you so much, Asquale. We'll see you next time.